All right, I think we are live. Good morning, everyone, and a really warm welcome to our webinar on behalf of ESCROWSURE. Thanks for joining us this morning and spending this time with us. Before we get started, please pop into the chat and say hi. Maybe let us know where you're joining from. Something like, hi, this is Guy from Cape Town. There's people already saying hi. Thank you. That's great. Just a few more seconds and we'll get underway. Fantastic. Hi, everyone. All right, just another half a minute, perhaps. There we go. Hi, Caroline. All right. Well, good morning and welcome. I'm your host for today's session. My name is Guy Krieger. I'm in-house legal for ESCROWSURE. Our previous webinar was in partnership with Dr. Peter Tobin, where we talked about the Joint Standard number 2 of 2024, cybersecurity and cyber resilience requirements, which comes into effect in June this year. But today we're excited to introduce a very special guest. I have the pleasure to introduce to you Nerushka Bowan. She's a pioneer in AI law and legal innovation, and she's now empowering legal professionals to navigate the rapidly evolving world of technology. She's formerly the head of technology and innovation in a large law firm, and Nerushka is the founder of the LIT Institute, where she leads groundbreaking initiatives including Gen AI Legal Accelerator and Legal Innovation Accelerator courses. Additionally, Nerushka hosts Brains Bubbly and Beyond, the podcast delivering corporate AI and privacy law training. She is authoring a book, Generative AI for the Future Ready Lawyer, be published by Juta in mid this year, 2025. And so she's an international thought leader on AI and tech law. Welcome, Nerushka. We're so pleased to have you with us, and we're grateful for your time this morning.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Fantastic. Now, we want this webinar to be informative and also interactive. So we've included 3 quick polls for our audience to give us just a bit of a picture of who's in the room with us. So before we launch our first poll, let me just take a moment to explain how the polling system works. On your screens, you will see the Mentimeter QR code. You can scan this and it'll take you straight to our live polling environment. Or if you have difficulty with the QR code, you can log on to menti.com and use the numerical code on your screen to access the polling environment instead. Please be assured, the polling is anonymous. No one will know who you are or how you voted on our polls. Great. So we're going to kick off just with 3 quick questions to give us some insight into who's in the room. So starting with the organization, we're going to look at the size of the organization that you are a part of. And there are 4 options: under 100 employees, between 105,000, 5,000 to 10,000, or over 10,000 employees. Please click your responses now. I'm not seeing those responses. Ah, there we are. So lots of people from organizations under 100. Yep, the next biggest is over 10,000, so large corporates, and that's a useful pie chart to give us an idea of how that's working. All right, so let's go quickly on to our next poll. What is your role in the organization? Are you from risk? Are you in operations? Do you represent governance and compliance? Are you part of the legal world? You're an attorney or an advocate or in-house counsel for a large corporate, perhaps? Are you an IT manager or an executive? Or are you perhaps something different altogether? Won't you type it in the chat for us? Please give us your responses to that second poll when you're ready. Tremendous. Looks like governance and compliance is a clear winner here, and that's what we want, because that's exactly what we are addressing today. Plenty of legal and some IT management. Great. Super duper. Now, finally, a quick idea, and this is where you'll be grateful for the anonymity of this poll. Just give us an idea of your awareness. How aware are you of the risks and the regulatory environment related to AI? Are you very aware and informed? Are you somewhat aware but need to learn more? Or you don't know much about it, and that's why you're here? I think we could have predicted that most people in the webinar today are somewhat aware, but keen to learn more. Fantastic. Thank you so much for participating in our polls. We'll let that Mentimeter screen disappear. And enough about us. Let's get to our expert to cast some light into this fascinating field of AI and its governance. Nerushka, welcome once again, and thanks again for your time. Could you provide some general context for AI in the South African environment and how prevalent its use is, together with maybe South Africa's current approach to regulating AI in the governance space?
Sure. And I think that question, it's a big question because it comes back to how you define AI. And everybody has their own kind of perception of what AI or artificial intelligence is, and based on what that means, how much it's being used in society today. So how I like to frame it is that it's basically, when you start giving these machines human-like qualities, that you can start to say they're becoming artificially intelligent. So a couple of years ago, when we said something had AI, it could even have been a simple logic-based tool, a decision tree in the background, nothing too advanced, but we would say it has AI capabilities. Today, I would think that it needs to be a little bit more advanced, that it needs to show machine learning, for example. It needs to have some kind of advanced algorithm backing it for us to then say that we're using AI. So if we're looking at that type of definition, something a little bit more advanced, I would say yes, we are still seeing widespread usage, and every single one of us actually uses AI in our day-to-day lives, whether we're aware of it or not. After you may be commuting home after your work day, and your phone will tell you it's going to take you 27 minutes to get home today based on current traffic. Now, how does it know that it's going to take you 27 minutes? You haven't asked it anything, but now it's predicting behavior based on your usage. It knows you drive this route at this time every single day. It's assisting you by already going to check the traffic without you even asking and coming back and telling you. And that is a form of AI that we live with. Then you get home, you're tired from your day, you want to just kick back and maybe watch some Netflix. You put Netflix on, and then you've got this list there saying, we think you will love these shows. So what is Netflix doing again? It's learning your, based on everything you've watched in the past, it's now created a profile about you, and its very advanced algorithm is now predicting what it thinks you will watch next. And if you want to see the Netflix algorithm in action, go and look at the homepage of somebody who's got very different viewing habits from yourself. There's so much content on Netflix. You only see a small percentage based on your past watching behavior. So if you had to go look at my sister's Netflix, it's all K-dramas. If you're going to look at my parents, it's all Bollywood. If you're looking at my husband, it's like these documentaries and action type of stuff. If you're looking at mine, there's some crazy reality shows and kiddies programs that are going to pop up there. But, we're all watching the same Netflix, but it's been tuned for us. Now, when it comes to regulation, and especially South African approach to regulation, we don't have an AI regulation that says when you're using AI, these are the rules you have to follow. But we do have a lot of regulation that might apply to the use case. So, for example, a big one is POPIA, the Protection of Personal Information Act, because when you're processing somebody's personal information in an AI algorithm, you are processing personal information. So we have to be mindful of our existing laws. Then if you're working in a highly regulated environment, maybe you're in banking or insurance or healthcare, those industries already have lots of existing regulations that we also have to be mindful of. So it's not so much about having an AI regulation. It's about looking at what are you doing with the AI, and most of us, in some shape or form, are using AI, whether it's as simple as using ChatGPT, or we implementing AI systems in our organizations. We're doing something with it. It's to identify what are we doing with it, and are there existing things we need to already comply with. We don't have to wait for an AI regulation.
Makes perfect sense. But is the South African regulatory environment lagging behind international trends, or are we sort of up to date?
Sure. So, I mean, internationally, there's so much of activity, and it's quite interesting from a regulatory perspective because we're so used to regulation taking a long time. For example, in the privacy world, there were years and years and years before some jurisdictions got comprehensive privacy regulations. But with AI, things seem to be moving a lot quicker. So we already have a comprehensive AI regulation in the EU, which is the EU AI Act, which is a risk-based approach, and it looks at things like high-risk use cases, your kind of general purpose AI, which are all your frontier labs like OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and Meta. And so it's really looking at those type of use cases. And then obviously organizations who are using AI in the EU will have some kind of obligations following that. Now, everybody's wondering, similar to how we had the GDPR in the EU, are we going to see a flavor of that regulation now pop up all over the world? This is a little bit different because it's based on EU product liability kind of legislation in the back end, which it's not really something that we have, in many other jurisdictions. So I don't think we're going to see too similar to what we have in the EU Act. We're definitely going to see flavors like AI literacy requirements, transparency requirements, certain high-risk obligations we might see in other jurisdictions, but I don't think it's going to be like a copy and paste of what we've seen in the EU. Places like the US are also very interesting because the change in president brought about a whole lot of change in their approach to their regulations. So under the Biden administration, we had the AI executive order, and a lot of work was done under that at a federal level. And then in January, one of the first acts when President Trump took over was to turn over that executive order and put in place his plan with regards to how AI will be moving forward. So it's still very AI focused, still want to be a leader in AI, but each president has their plan in terms of how that will be achieved. So what they are focusing on from a geopolitical perspective is control over the AI chips. Now, remember, all of these very large machines require very sophisticated AI processing chips in order to be trained, in order to become so smart and do all of these things. Now, for the US to remain a leader in the space, they are putting some hefty export controls on those chips. So, for example, certain chips are limited to 1,700 units per export and things like that, limiting access to China, for example, because they don't want China to overtake them by getting access to these chips. And what we've seen as a result of these geopolitical measures is that places like China have now innovated new ways of doing things. So they found cheaper ways of achieving the same result as frontier labs in the US because they didn't have access to the chips that the US companies have had. So we've had the DeepSeek development over December, January, which pretty much, was on par with some of what OpenAI and Anthropic were doing in the US, but at a much lower cost. So there's a lot happening from that perspective. Regulation is coming at different levels. And what we're seeing and what we think we're going to see in South Africa based on our policy. So we have a policy framework which was published last year. It was open for comment until the end of November. We're going to have the second draft of that published hopefully any day now. It's with the minister for signature, and once the minister signs that will be published. And it creates pillars that South Africa is going to focus on in its AI policy framework going forward, one of which is regulation. But of course, there's industry development, economic things to look at. And South Africa, given our history and where we are, I think will be taking a human rights-based approach to AI regulation. So it's not going to be too much product liability, but more human rights-based.
So human rights-based, that would mean an emphasis on personal information, right?
As one of the criteria when you're looking at risks emanating from use of AI, privacy being one. Discrimination is a very big risk coming out of AI. And so if you look at our constitution, for example, one of the cornerstones of the South African democracy is, against unfair discrimination. So things like that, I think, will be taken more seriously in a South African approach when it comes to regulating AI.
It's fascinating as you speak to understand the reach of AI, and it touches everything from our personal information to our very constitution. Nerushka, how can our businesses, in the absence of a comprehensive AI legislation, how can we proactively establish governance standards that can anticipate the regulatory requirements related to AI?
Sure. I think there's a lot of work to be done even today. I don't think we need to wait for regulation to start getting things done. And I think each organization is taking a different approach. And I saw, even in this session, we have quite a wide variety, everything from, smaller below 100 organizations to the larger above 10,000 organizations. And, we wouldn't put the same approach for those two type of organizations because, the larger organizations, I would say, requires something standalone to be housed for AI governance that can actually be talking across the board and making sure everybody's doing what they need to be doing from an oversight perspective. Whereas in a smaller organization, there may be existing systems and committees and things already in place that we can add the AI kind of questions to. So whether it's our privacy office or our risk office or our, existing governance measures, we just need to ensure that these unique AI questions when it comes to ethics, discrimination, privacy, use of data, all of these things, are we assessing these things when we are implementing, when we're using, when we're processing, instead of trying to now reinvent the wheel. So again, we have a lot to do in terms of bringing these things into our organization, leveraging them, implementing them appropriately. But how the structures internally look will differ for each organization.
Makes perfect sense. And so, what are the sort of AI-related legal risks that would face these businesses, and how should they prioritize these risks within their strategies, their governance strategies?
Sure. So there's so many, but I'll just pick on some of the more common ones that we're seeing. So of course, let's just talk about data privacy for a second and why that is so important. Because we're now potentially giving everybody in our organization access to some of these tools. Some of these tools, maybe systems that are coming from an external third party or external service provider. And if we don't give proper guidance to the people in terms of what they can and can't put in or upload into these systems, we may be in situations where customer data is now being shared with a tool and added to that underlying training data, for example. So we do need to understand what is happening with our data when they go into these tools. Is it being ring-fenced? And you do get enterprise level AI that allows you to do those type of things. If you're building something in-house, you have a lot more control over data. But if you're just, licensing something off the shelf, just because you have a license and you're paying for it, doesn't mean that information is going to stay private. It's only on your top tier kind of enterprise grade packages that you get privacy. So we're seeing a pay for privacy model when it comes to AI. The higher up the ladder you go, the more privacy, the more security you will be getting. If you've got one of the entry level packages, it's possible that anything you're uploading into these tools can then still be used to buy these labs to train their models as well. So understanding that makes it quite important, especially from a privacy perspective, where we are responsible for the data that we're holding, that we don't want to fall foul of putting it where it shouldn't actually go. And that applies also to our company confidential information. Those things applies to some types of intellectual property that we may be having. There are sensitive categories of information that possibly should never go into an AI. And we need to delineate that for our company. The other one is copyright, intellectual property. So many, debates happening globally on this one. There's so many pending case lawsuits, especially in the US, just on this one aspect. Very interesting to see the position all the large tech providers are taking versus kind of experts in intellectual property. So what OpenAI and Meta and Microsoft and Google and the rest of them, who've basically just taken all the data they can get their hands on and trained these large language models on their data without asking permission, without getting a license. They've just used books, movies, whatever you can think of, and trained on it. They said it falls within the fair use principle. And they've used the analogy. It's similar to you reading a book, right? So if you've read Harry Potter, I can ask you questions about Harry Potter. You're going to tell me about Harry Potter. You telling me about Harry Potter is not you copy pasting the whole book of Harry Potter and delivering me a carbon copy of that book. So you're not infringing the copyright of the Harry Potter book by reading it and telling me about it. So they've now said that's what these large language models are doing. They've read the book and they're telling us about the book, but they haven't copied in the intellectual property infringement sense from a legal perspective. So everybody's waiting to see this being battled out in court because this is the position being taken and the stand being taken, but it hasn't been tested. And so we don't know where we're going to end up yet. So that's one arm of the intellectual property battle, is the underlying training data and the lack of licensing there. The other arm of the intellectual property battle is the output. So now you've used the AI, it's created something for you, whether it's a blog post, a painting, a poem, I don't know, a logo, a trademark, so many things that we're using AI for these days. The world is your oyster, a video, a photograph. What is the protection you're going to get from an IP perspective on the output? So if you look at your terms and conditions, it will say, you as the user of the tool own that output. So you may think, okay, if I own the output, then I'm also protected by copyright. But then we have some of the regulators in the world saying, well, if an AI made it, there was no human element. And our regulations talk about human authorship when it comes to copyright protection. And so therefore, there may be a gap. And if we don't have significant human input, then there's no protection in that output. And we've already seen some, it hasn't, not like in the courts, but I've already heard of, for example, a bank who had hired a marketing company. And that marketing company didn't tell them they were using AI to produce all their works. And now the bank is saying, actually, do we have protection from the work you're delivering to us if you've used AI to produce that, and you never told us about it? So these are the type of things we need to be very, very aware of. So if there's a lot of human element in that prompting, or humans adjusting things at the end, you can argue that yes, it's human authorship and the AI was a tool. But if it's like the AI did most of the work and the human less, then we in a bit of a gray area. So that's two big areas, which is privacy and copyright. And maybe the third one very quickly is liability. What happens when things go wrong? So, you think maybe the person who delivered you the AI will be responsible for that. Unlikely. It's more likely you as the organization who's choosing to use that tool to deliver services will be more likely liable to your customers if something goes wrong. So one interesting case in Canada, Air Canada had a chatbot on their website. Somebody went on and wanted to understand more information if they needed to cancel a flight due to a bereavement. And so they asked, is this possible? And the chatbot said, yes, we have a bereavement policy for this circumstance, and as provided you provide this information, you can get a refund. So this person went ahead, booked their flight. Unfortunately, a couple of days later, the person did pass away. Phoned customer service and said, I'd like to request a refund in terms of your bereavement policy. I've got all the required documentation, blah, blah, blah. The customer service agent said, well, we don't have a bereavement policy. There's no such thing. And they said, no, but I chatted to your chatbot, before I booked my flight just to make sure. And they said that you have this policy. And they were like, no such thing. It got escalated internally. And they're like, here's a little voucher. Sorry, but there's no such policy. This obviously then ended up in a tribunal, and the defense from Air Canada was that they are not liable for what the chatbot did because the chatbot is a separate legal entity. The tribunal didn't buy that defense and basically said, you are liable. It's on your website. You put the chatbot there to help your customers, and you now have to stand behind this made-up policy and refund the customer. So yes, it's great to have AI, but just be aware that when things can go wrong, you are ultimately liable to the customer in those scenarios. So as I said, many, many more, but these are just three of the most topical issues.
That last example is an absolutely fascinating scenario where the AI went and searched wider than the actual practices of the organization and said it found its own solution, which was incorrect.
Yeah.
Quite scary, the risks associated. Can you perhaps give us some examples of best practices in governance and maybe ethical AI implementation that our SA companies can learn from?
Yeah. So I think one of the most important differences when it comes to implementing technology with AI is the ethical side of things. So now you may have your risk assessments in place, all these security questions, all the good stuff, the privacy questions, the privacy assessments, risk assessments, and you're ticking your box when you're putting in one of these systems. Now, what we've seen with AI is there's another additional set of questions we need to be asking when we're implementing, and that very strong on the ethical side. And so what we've seen from a best practice perspective is kind of extending or adding a new assessment or extending an existing assessment to include and capture those type of questions. And what do we want to see in those kind of ethical questions? Bias and discrimination. Now, let me just spend a minute just unpacking why this is so important. Now, many reasons. Let's come back to the underlying training data for a second. The algorithm is only as good as the data it was fed. Now, we have to remember the data is very Western-centric for one, and it also perpetuates any stereotype you can think of is further perpetuated because of the underlying data that we have. The other situation is that, we have lack of good data, for example, on the African continent. There's just not enough data to even train these models, to even get to a place to compare to what we already have. So the lack of data, the Western-centric nature of it in terms of the underlying models creates a situation where we get a lot of bias built into the output. So we have to bear that in mind and evaluate with a critical eye when we're looking at that output, how did it come to that conclusion? Because remember, the smarter the algorithm gets, the bigger the black box around the logic and the reasoning. The simple models, we know what it took into account. We know how it arrived at the answer. When things get too smart, we actually don't know how it arrived at a conclusion. So that needs to be super important. And what it means from an ethical perspective is, what have we built into our processes to pick up bias and discrimination? Is there a human checking things? POPIA, for example, has this little section on automated decision making, which requires you to add in steps when you're making decisions based on a person's personal information. So we need to see, how do we start incorporating these type of steps into our workflows? So a simple one is HR. A lot of people are using now AI to evaluate CVs because you've got thousands of CVs. And so the AI is kind of doing the first stretch of that. Now, the problem with that is, what is it looking for in those CVs when it's doing its evaluation? Are you feeding it your historic data in terms of who you've hired in the past to evaluate who you're going to hire in the future? Now, if you've had a diversity issue in the past, how is using your historic data going to fix your problem in the future? You're just going to perpetuate the problem, because the candidates you want to hire are going to get screened out, and it's only the same type of people you've already hired are going to be recommended by your AI system. So bias and discrimination, very, very important when it comes to the ethical kind of implementation of AI, and we need to ensure the right people are asking those questions. One other thing, just to say from a best practice perspective, is you do need the right person that has the authority to stand up and question things. Sometimes, organizations will have the person, but the person they've put in that space is possibly not senior enough to be able to stand up, and will just end up saying yes to things or allowing things to pass because of a lack of seniority. So we do need the right person in those roles as well.
So what you're saying there, Nerushka, is this is a serious issue. There are serious, for example, privacy issues at stake, and somebody with appropriate authority needs to be put in charge of addressing these things. You mentioned earlier about the South African regulations coming into play. Is there something our private sector can do to influence those national strategies?
So be aware of what's happening at a kind of government level. I mean, last year, the AI policy framework was open for comment until the end of November. Use those opportunities to put your comments forward, because they do take those things quite seriously. They do have stakeholder engagements, and there is another round coming up, in this year. So be alert to that. And when the opportunity comes, and if your organization wants to be part of that conversation, make sure your inputs are given when the time comes. So these are the opportunities we have, and we need to make use of it. We can't just 2 years from now sit back and say, oh, I don't like the way they've done so and so, when we didn't take the time to engage in those stakeholder forums.
Excellent. Our time is running short. I know that I could easily sit here for several hours and listen to your stories about this. It's fascinating. But looking ahead, what are your predictions for the evolution of AI, and what should South African companies do now to prepare for future changes? This environment is so dynamic and changing so rapidly. How can we position ourselves correctly?
Such an interesting question because of the fast pace of AI. Like a couple of months ago, it was about writing these chain of thought prompts that, you guided the AI step by step to where they should get to. Now we have research agents. We have deep research agents who are pre-prompted in chain of thought. So you don't need to know chain of thought prompting anymore. You can just tell it what you want, and it will go through things logically step by step, almost at a PhD researcher level to get the output back to you. So you can't be rigid. You can't be rigid because things are changing every single day. From a kind of sustainability perspective in an organization, you almost need to have different pockets of what's happening at any given time. So you need to have this one pocket that's your kind of stable line, which is, this is what everybody's doing. This is what we've agreed. This is our policy standard, and everybody's on this page. But then you also kind of need like the cowboys in the organization who are at the frontier figuring out, what's going to happen tomorrow and how do we leverage the best thing tomorrow that's going to make the sense for our organization. So you need a bit of both. And not everybody in the organization should be using the latest thing that was released yesterday, but somebody needs to be looking at that. I hope to see more like kind of R&D, but R&D with the innovation focus, not R&D with like a kind of, science lab focus. R&D that's like, how do we take this? How do we play with this? And how do we make it beneficial for our organization? I will also say a big thing for me is that corporates are looking at AI as how can we get rid of humans and replace them with AI and reduce our bottom line? And I think that's a very short-sighted way to look at AI deployment. You should be saying, how do we supercharge our humans with AI capability and turn their productivity 10 times? Unfortunately, where we currently are with most organizations, they look at a department, oh, there's 3 people here. Can we remove 2 and give the 1 person AI and they can do the job of 3 people? What about saying, let's give all 3 AI, supercharge them 10 times productivity rather than, cutting 5 cents instead of increasing to 5 million. So I'm hoping we see that shift in mindset about empowering people. I think we're going to see this crunch where there's going to be retrenchments. Unfortunately, we're going to see that negative aspect of AI revolution come first before people realize we actually need humans, and then the rehiring phase will come kind of after that. Yes, AI is amazing. It can do a lot, but humans are also amazing. And we shouldn't forget that.
Absolutely. And in this rapidly changing environment, isn't it true that each of us humans needs to learn something about how to use this incredible and exciting new tool in our environment to boost our own productivity?
100%. I mean, that's what I do day to day, is teaching others about AI and how to use it and making the most of it so that they are part of the future, creating the future as opposed to playing catch up. And I always tell people, play, be curious. You don't have to do a work use case your first time you're picking up AI. Do something, create a recipe with the ingredients you have in your fridge. Start with something simple, learn how it works through playing with it. And even, there's all these prompting trends you see online, like creating that superhero figurine. Even that teaches you prompting because it's not so easy. You think it's so easy just saying create, but then you'll get some weird looking thing and you're like, why does everybody else's look so nice and mine looks so strange? It's because you don't know how to prompt. And then by playing with it and prompting it, you realize the power of prompting. And then when you're actually doing something for work, you don't have to spend those hours of catching up because you've learned like tips in terms of how to get a better output.
Well, our time is running out. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. We're going to have to draw this to a close. Nerushka, our sincere thanks to you for sharing your insights with us today. You can find Nerushka on LinkedIn and online at Lit Institute. That's LITT. We'll post a link below. But thanks again, Nerushka, and thank you to you all for joining us and participating in our polls and our discussion. We really hope you found this session useful and informative. If you'd like to know more about specifically managing software risk or using software escrow arrangements, please reach out to us on LinkedIn or at escrowsure.co.za. We're offering a free consultation and risk assessment for the next couple of weeks. But thanks for sharing your day with us. Wishing you a wonderful afternoon, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.